Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Nick Casale. Nick is the Director of Sales at Sendoso, which is the leading sending platform. He's responsible for all the mid-market and enterprise sales team there at Sendoso. And if you haven't heard of Sendoso, I'm going to tell you right now, go check them out. So Sendoso is a platform that enables you to send physical objects, e-gifts, and what they call create physical impressions. It's a term that they've trademarked with your prospects and your customers. Nick is one of those people he was actually the third employee and the first sales hire at Sendoso. And he helped build Sendoso's sales process from the ground up before stepping into his current role as a director to focus on scaling the sales organization. He's really passionate both about the problem that Sendoso helps you solve, which is how do we get better engagement, better relationships built with our target customers and our prospects, and how do you rise above that digital noise that we're all feeling every single day? How do you connect with prospects and customers at a more human level? And so prior to Sendoso, as you'll hear a little bit at the end of the conversation, Nick was also an early sales hire at Talkdesk. So definitely understands startups, understands sales, understands the technology stack out there, and how to sell as a startup. So one of the main reasons I wanted to have Nick here on the show. A couple of the topics that we talked about, we really kind of two parts of the conversation. Spent about 2/3 of the time talking about the importance and how some very tactical tips on this idea of physical impressions. So specifically, a couple of things to listen for is number one, the difference between implied versus actual ROI. We talked about where does a physical object, a gift that you would send to someone, or it doesn't have to be a gift, any kind of physical object, how does it sit in this world of billboards and digital ads? And how do you track the results that you get from sending out a physical object to making a physical impression? We talked about 3 specific areas across your sales funnel where you could be using physical impressions. Number one, at the start of your sales engagement with prospects and target future customers. Secondly, we talked about how to use it mid-funnel as a way to build on top of a relationship and that you are going to need to help pull a deal from early stage to middle stage to late stage. And then thirdly, we talked about the end of the sales funnel when you're close to conversion or just post-contract. What are some gifts and objects that you could be sending to your now new customers? So he had lots and lots of examples from different people and companies, that names and companies you'll recognize, people like Pete Kajani over at Atrium. He talked about some examples from companies like Snowflake and Blend and some others. So another one, I'm looking at my notes right now, a couple of other companies as well. So most importantly, I think the thing to listen for is regardless of where you are in your startup journey, in your sales journey, and regardless of what industry you're in, and he used Blend as an example, selling to banks and selling to executives at banks. It may not seem like you have an opportunity to use physical objects or gifts or impressions as part of your sales process, but the facts are, and the data shows, that if you do this effectively, if you do it the right way, it will help you with your conversion rates, will help you generate a better relationship, and it's going to help you with your customer relationships down the road as well. So definitely want to help you walk out of here with some ideas on what you could be doing. Everything from as simple as literally sending a case study as opposed to emailing it, sending it in the mail, all the way through to things like cupcakes and Oreos, which you might roll your eyes when you hear that and say, oh, that stuff doesn't work. It does work. And he explains exactly how and why it works. We spent about the last 15 minutes of our conversation also talking about Nick's experience as an early stage company sales leader. He was the first sales hire at Sendoso. And we talked about his journey, both starting at Sendoso and what he's been able to do over the last couple of years, moving from being an individual contributor as an account executive now as a director. We talked about when they brought in a chief revenue officer, and we talked about when he and the Sendoso co-founder, Chris, decided it was time to move him out of that contributor role and into the director role. So lots and lots of great stuff packed into this episode, this conversation with Nick Casale. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Nick. Nick, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Scott, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I've got a couple of different topics I'd love to cover with you today, both around the work that you're doing every day at Sendoso, and also your experience as a first sales hire and sales leader and now sales manager, director of sales there. Before we dig into all that, one of the questions I love to ask people is, when you meet new people or you're talking to people on Zoom for the first time, and they say, "Hey Nick, like, what do you do? How do you describe yourself professionally, and maybe even a little bit about yourself personally?"
Yeah, it's a funny question. I'm pretty sure my mom thinks I work at FedEx, basically, because it's always a mixed bag. But yeah, I say Sendoso is a sending platform. So we basically handle the logistics and the technology piece of getting just about anything you'd ever want to send to your prospects and your customers, whether it's a coffee gift card, a branded T-shirt, or a coffee mug from where they went to school.
Got it. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show. Is I was telling you before we hopped on the recording here, I first was exposed to Sendoso about a year and a half ago down at the Outreach.io conference. I forget the name of their conference, but they had a big user conference every year down in San Diego last year. And I saw this booth and I was like, "What do you guys do?" And whoever it was at the booth said, like, "Oh, we send gifts out and we have this platform that sends." I'm like, "This is amazing. I can't believe I've never heard of you before." And so you mentioned coffee cards and coffee mugs, and you do lots and lots of different objects, I guess, the way to think about it. And you guys have trademarked this idea of doing physical impressions with customers, with prospects. So I guess like I would love to hear from you for somebody who's never, or even maybe they thought about sending physical gifts or objects of some kind, making a physical impression, but they're not sure how to do it, why to do it, how do we assess ROI of these kinds of things. How do you guys like think about this problem or think about this opportunity in the marketplace for a software startup at seed stage, A-round stage to like actually send out physical gifts? Why should they do it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott, and it's something that I think a ton about. The way that I always try to sort of relate it back at its most simplest form is, sending is something that, or gifting, however you want to think about it, is something that everyone understands. At some point in your life, you've given someone a gift, you've experienced that reaction, both how you felt, how they felt, and kind of what happened thereafter. In business, you've probably sent someone a T-shirt, a hat, right? There is that process of sending, but it's always been something that almost is taken for granted as fragmented and siloed and has an implied ROI rather than necessarily a very well-tracked ROI.
Mm-hmm.
So you fast forward and all of a sudden there's all this great technology that we can use to actually get really intelligent about tracking it. And the simplest way that I try to explain the parallel with sort of physical impressions is if you rewind, before internet, every company would go and buy billboards, right? And they still exist. They're still great. I know whenever I drive, down to the South Bay or back up, you see all those billboards. You like ClickUp is a company I never would have heard of. Saw their billboard yesterday driving, right? Those work. But they're never going to be able to attribute that back to me driving past the billboard, right? You fast forward and there's all of these digital billboards, basically, right? There's digital ads. And those are extremely trackable. Those are your digital impressions. So I think in a lot of ways, Sendoso is sort of sending from that billboard phase of we do it, we know it works, but it's basically untrackable to, all right, we can get really intelligent about when we do this, how we do it, and then we have all the data to continue to fine tune that.
So you just previewed a couple of questions that I had right now. So
yeah.
I guess a couple categories of questions are like, what do I send that I know is useful and perceived as being valuable, when and how, and tracking. So maybe just start logistically with like tracking. Like I send the easiest thing for me to send is a copy of my book. So I can take I have boxes of those in my garage. If I meet somebody, or I think they might want a copy, I'd grab a copy, sign it, send it off to them. And it's easy because I can just go down to the FedEx store. It's whatever, $8 to send it 3-day and it's done. But like beyond that, I guess I always have that question. It's like, I can track that they've received it because I'm sending it FedEx, but how do I track if it was useful as part of, a conversation I might be having with a prospective client?
Sure.
How do you guys think about that? How do you track that?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to you definitely want to understand sort of what to send based on what your desired outcome is. That's how I think about it. So
Okay.
if you're sending at, let's say, and let's just use sort of the sales use case, right? I think that's the most obvious, easily understandable for everyone. If you're totally cold, you're reaching out to someone, you probably want to send something that's either going to be educational and really try to sort of pique that interest, very personalized, right? To say, hey, I'm definitely trying to reach out to you. This is not a blast to 2,000 people, right? Or something that's very low cost and really easy to do, but still is going to be differentiated from everything else you're doing. So educational, we'll break those down, right? Educational, you can send a case study, right? Every company out there, even if you're small, one of the first things you start doing is generating content, right? You want to sort of create your brand voice. So you start to tell a story. But if someone's not going to your website, if someone's not opening your emails, they're not letting you tell that story. So why not, print that out and get it in front of someone, right? Pete Kazanji, right? Brilliant sales leader, runs Atrium now. Yeah. All they do is they offer sales books to people. Hey, I noticed you're hiring for sales. Can we get you a copy of this great book on, sales hiring methodology on us? And for them, that's educational, right? And it's also sort of rising above the noise and it's letting them tell their own story. So that's one.
Could I just jump in there on a couple of
absolutely.
Of things? So two things. A case study, I wouldn't have. Well, I guess first of all, the idea if I'm just starting a cadence or I'm reaching out to somebody who meets my ideal customer profile. I know they're on my target list of accounts.
Sure.
I wouldn't have even thought of a case study as something to send as the first thing to send, but it makes as soon as you said case study, I was like, oh, duh, because they don't know who we are, and they're probably concerned about results and are we legitimate? So if I send somebody a coffee with my logo on it, like that's not useful and it's not educational. So what this does is actually positions me in a way of authority, and it shows that I'm willing to invest. This case study could be, nice color, send in a nice package, and I open it up. I don't know what something like that costs, but I'm probably wasting way more money than I would have spent on a $5 color, nicely formatted case study that I could just send out via your platform. So it really positions you as an authority and shows you're serious about business, not like here's a pen or here's a coffee mug.
And I think the piece too, I mean, I can talk all day about what to send, right? The sort of theory of it. I've obviously thought a lot about this, but at the end of the day, all that you're solving for is getting something in someone's hands, because as soon as you're able to do that, they're automatically going to remember that, right? If I asked you right now what, the last 10 digital ads that you saw were, you wouldn't know. But if I asked you the last box that you opened that got sent to your apartment, your house, that's something that's pretty easy to remember because you're spending so much time with that. You're holding it. That's why it's sort of called a physical impression. There's such a higher level of engagement with anything that is tactile than anything that is digital, fleeting. I mean, half of emails are deleted unopened, right? So I don't think there's many people that throw away half the boxes they get without opening them. Let's ignore junk mail. Hopefully you're not sending junk mail,
But even that junk mail, they've gotten good at making the envelopes look like you should at least open it because it might be a bill or it might be something else. You're like, okay, I got to at least open it, and then I can tear it up and throw it away.
Exactly.
So it's the equivalent of a good subject line. And something else you mentioned about Pete, which super smart guy, and he does so much for the sales community with Modern Sales Pros and now obviously with Atrium. Mm-hmm. You said something that I'm wondering if he does this on purpose, that he's got his target person, right? He says, I noticed you're hiring. Would it be okay if I sent you a book, or can I get you a copy of this? So he's doing that on purpose to get some level of engagement before he invests in sending the book. Is that something like a technique that he does on his own, or is that something you recommend people do? I was just kind of curious if that was purposeful, or because I guess you could have like a list of 500 target companies and send 500 books, but I guess you could rather just send 100 to the people who are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'd love to get a copy.
Well, Pete's brilliant with this stuff, and he's a great thought leader. And I think the one thing that he does, which will really lead into having success with Sendoso and any tech that you're going to invest in, he hires great people. And so what he does is he equips his reps with the right tools so that when there is that compelling event, they can then go and reach out in a way that's being sort of a trusted advisor. And I think that's going to set the tone for the whole sales cycle, right? Where rather than saying, hey, I noticed you're hiring, Atrium is going to help with blah, 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 which it is, right? But you haven't really earned the right to have that conversation yet. And we use Atrium, by the way, it's phenomenal. But the best way to open that combo is by saying, hey, I noticed you're hiring, what about this book on sales hiring? Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, awesome. Hey, we also have this data sheet on best practices for looking at your reps' metrics as they ramp. Does that also sound interesting? Yeah, it does. How do you guys know all this? Oh, well, just so happens we sell a tool that facilitates all this. That's a conversation. Yeah. It's a value-based conversation. So it's really about understanding how you get the right to start to have that conversation. And I think that's a lot of ways where intelligent physical impression starts to really facilitate that in a way that also is building a relationship, right? Because there is some emotion around opening a package that someone has sent you. And there's some psychology of the reciprocity behind all that too.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. I'm just kind of curious because I'm sure that's the basis of everything that you guys are doing. I know if I send something, I would, the sense of like, I got something in the mail, I should do something back.
Yeah, it's a super interesting study. I honestly try to continue to learn more because it's every time I start to kind of read a book and pick up on it, I go deeper down this rabbit hole. But there's so much around just the psychology of reciprocity, and that often if you extend that a gift and offer, people will basically reciprocate with something that is far above what it was that you had offered in the first place. Fundamentally as human beings, right? We just want to sort of reciprocate that offer whenever it's extended. One of the classic books, the name is completely escaping me, but it's one of the classic psychology books. I think it's Influence.
Robert Cialdini. Probably, because it's like one of the best books written in the last 30 years.
I know. It's going to bug me. I was listening to it the other day on a run too. But there's, chapters and chapters about just the psychology of reciprocity. And it's a really interesting part of sales and business.
Yeah. Well, you think about the cost equation here. Like if I send a case study or a book, right, a case study in a nice color, nice heavy cardstock, like I said, it's probably a couple bucks. And even after shipping, it's going to be under 10, right? Same with a book. I don't know how much it costs for me. The printing cost of a book is $3 or $4. You can go to Amazon, self-publish a book, and your unit costs you a couple bucks, and then you ship it, and it's a couple bucks. And so the reciprocity is like, I'm going to spend $10 sending this book, but if I get a meeting out of it, then like, what are you spending right now to get a meeting? What are your customer acquisition costs right now to get that first meeting? It's probably order of magnitude higher than $10. And so this idea of reciprocity is like, here's a $10 item, but the practice of sending it, getting it, opening it. Now it's like, okay, you guys know what you're doing, and you're like, nobody else is doing this because everybody else is like batch and blasting me on email. Then I'll take 15 minutes, a 15-minute meeting with you now. And now you've just opened up the top of the funnel for yourself.
Especially right now when everyone is talking about, account-based marketing, account-based sales, ICP, hyper-focusing. What is it really worth to spend 15 minutes on a hyper-personalized email if as soon as you click send, it's like a baby turtle. That thing's got a 25% chance of just making it to the ocean, right? So, try something that's got a little bit of better chance of survival. Yeah.
Oh man, emails are baby turtles, man. I got to write that one down. That's great. But you're right. It's like you spend all this time, developing and creating this email, and then you send it, and when you hit send, even if you are targeted, even if it is your ICP, even if you're hitting the right buyer, like what percentage of those are actually going to get read and replied to?
Baby turtles, man.
Baby turtles. I love that. So this is really useful so far, right? So like thinking about when you start off, you said be educational and personalized. So we talked about case studies and a book, for example. It's also low cost, which you said is important because you don't want to spend, $100 getting that first meeting. So what about later on down the line? So let's say, what's another example or two? Like once I get a meeting and somebody's in my pipeline, for example, I've done the requisite qualification and we're getting some other stakeholders involved. It's an enterprise deal. So it's going to be multiple months before even if they're on a fast track to buy. What are some other examples along the way of physical impressions that I should be making Because now it's like, if we're selling enterprise, it's not just one person I'm cracking the door open with. Now I got to like maybe send 5 or 10 of these. How do you guys think through that or advise your customers on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. The piece I always think about during a sales cycle, sales process is those relationship building exercises. And this is something that a lot of companies have adopted into their sales process and is part of their methodology. I'll give you an example. Yext has a field in Salesforce where to progress a deal from a certain stage to the next, you have to fill out what your relationship building exercise was. And
interesting.
You can look at, obviously pre-COVID, that can be an office visit, right? A presentation, took them to lunch, whatever it was, something that's building that relationship, you're shaking their hand, you're seeing them in person. I think every salesperson understands that when you meet someone and shake their hand, you feel like that deal has a little bit of a better chance of closing, right? Because you've humanized yourself a little bit. You meet them, you're more than a rep behind a screen or behind a phone. So what I think a lot about is, how can you start to try to give yourself a little bit of that unfair advantage that you get from, having lunch with someone, meeting them, the face-to-face conversation. And I think that's where it can be, it doesn't have to be over the top still. You don't have to spend a whole bunch of money. But sending, like, sounds funny, but the one that I love is send them a dozen cupcakes. Like, everyone loves cupcakes. No one gets mad about getting cupcakes. It never seems like it's this exorbitant expense where, oh, I can't accept this. It's not a pair of Bose headphones, but it's fun to get. No one really goes and buys themselves a dozen cupcakes, so it's a little bit indulgent.
Yeah,
that's one of my silver bullets. Company swag is easy. I work with a company called Scratchpad. They sent me a Yeti mug. I was super stoked to get it. I'm using it right now. I see their logo every day now when I make a coffee. So there's little things that just start to build that relationship and create a little bit of that brand affinity, I think, throughout the process.
Okay. So something like cupcakes. So if I'm just a very skeptical, technology based founder, I'm an engineer, very analytical type, and somebody sends me cupcakes, like somebody might be saying like, come on, really, like cupcakes? Like, we went from being useful and educational with books and case studies to cupcakes. Like, does that really work? And like, how do I think about staying aligned with like kind of who I am as a salesperson or as a company and who my customers are, so I don't all of a sudden seem like I'm going from focused and educational to like what some people might say is like foo-foo and like, unicorns and rainbow kind of gifts.
Well, I think it all comes down to earning the right with anything that you're going to send. And that's where we talked a lot about starting with educational, right? And starting to earn the right to have those conversations. But once someone's in a cycle or they've been in a cycle, it's a little bit of just the gesture. So I'll give you one example and put you on the spot. So you used to work at Blend. I know a little bit about the business. That buyer is not necessarily someone who's warm and fuzzies, right?
Yeah, mortgage head of operations at a mortgage lending company is not, typically, I mean, yeah, they're human, but from a business standpoint, when you're selling, they're not huggers. Let's put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll give you one guess what Blend's most successful campaign was with Sendoso.
Well, now I'm going to guess cupcakes.
It's a trap because it's not cupcakes, but it was chocolate covered Oreos branded with their logo.
Okay. Chocolate covered Oreos.
Branded with their logo, right? So it looks really nice. And again, that's a lot of the thing here too is I talk a lot about brand forward. I think with anything you're doing, and that's a lot too of the psychology of the physical impressions and sort of the billboard, the modern billboard, which is you could spend all that money on a billboard and you can hire a consulting team to sit in a room and think about what to put in it. But at the end of the day, just throwing your logo on a billboard on the highway is going to be a net positive for you. Like, you don't have to overthink it. You can, and that'll sort of like Snowflake's a great example here. Snowflake's a great customer of ours. Their billboards are incredibly intelligent, and that definitely gives them a lift up above just their logo. But if you just have your logo there, that'll give you some sense of brand. So a little bit of a tangent there, back to Blend. So they sent something very brand forward, chocolate covered Oreos. Now, when did they send it, right? So this was something where COVID hit. Actually, it was a different example. Sorry. But for Blend, it was still opportunities that they had already presented to. And so they had already presented, they'd already had a value-based conversation, and they stalled out for whatever reason. So rather than just sort of the checking in email, I think every sales professional, marketing professional is trying to figure out how to avoid the checking in email, but we all do it because it's so easy. So what about checking in Oreos?
Just to see if you get a response from them. I mean, because what you're trying to do is get engagement or re-engagement. And to your point, I like something you said, which is like after a presentation. So, by being there, whether it's physically or in Zoom, you can make, like, if you're an intelligent professional, you can make an assessment, like how engaged were they in the conversation? Are they clear? Okay, they shared with us during the discovery phase what their problems were. We showed the demo. We showed how the problem solves or how our product solves their problem. So you've had this like substantial conversation about their business and how you might be able to help them. They're not obviously ready to buy, but you've had that, like, it's there. And so it could have stalled out for who knows how many reasons, right? Change in priorities, change in budget, summer, kids are home, they don't have summer camp, so now that they can do half the work they expect to do. There could be, 100 reasons why it stalls. And all you're trying to do with that check-in email, or in this case, check-in Oreos, just you're trying to get somebody to like get engaged again. Right. And then you can pick up to see where we are on this thing.
And I always try to think about stripping sales down to sort of its most basic variables and fundamentals. And I always think it's interesting to sort of rewind the clock and you think about sales sort of pre-internet, when let's say you were going to buy, I don't know, a phone system, right? And there's a sales rep who's driving around going from office park to office park, and he walks in. Sure. What were the activities there that sort of helped him make that sale? Because I think a lot of those fundamentals still hold true. And it's, that first, he's bringing educational materials, right? He's trying to pique that interest. He's getting in the door. If he knows he has a deal there, maybe he is stopping by and bringing sort of that gift basket at some point, right?
That's right.
And at the end of the day, it's a product that's commoditized, right? So what differentiates, like how do people make these decisions? And so much of it is who's top of mind, where's that relationship, right? So I think for any sales rep who is overconfident, thinks I'm going to win on product alone, I say, hey, congratulations. It's awesome that you're selling the best product in the market. I think everyone should have that level of confidence, but you also, and Matt Cameron talks a lot about the best sales reps. I know you're connected with Matt too.
Yeah. Matt's a good friend. Yeah.
I love the way Matt thinks about this stuff. He talks about how one of the great things he thinks made him a great seller is his paranoia, right? So I think assume in every sales cycle that your buyer is looking at you all as equal and commoditized, or maybe even a little bit more aggressive and think that you're behind. Because I think it's easy when you work at a startup, you understand how great what you do is, that you think, they're going to buy us because we're the best. Sell that way, but throw that idea out the window when you're actually sort of considering your next step, your motions, right? Always sell like you're in behind almost, from that perspective of what can I do to really give myself that advantage? And that's where sending something is never going to hurt your odds.
Yeah, and I like your analogy about what would you do pre-internet, because I was selling college textbooks to universities, just as the internet was coming around, late 90s, early 2000s. And one of the things they would teach us is when you go to an office, bring the marketing brochure with the textbook, right? And you just leave it there if the professor's not there. And it sounds kind of like silly. Why would I do that? Do people really read marketing? But it's a physical impression. They could pick up the brochure along with a copy of the book and then see what the editors were thinking and the author was thinking when they built the book, right? So it's like the equivalent of, in some ways, like a case study. I used to leave, I made these little cards, and I used to, at the end of every week on Friday, I would sit down and mail out these little postcards to every person I met with. And sometimes it'd take me like, 50 or 60 of these would be going out because I'd been to 4 or 5 campuses. But like, it's the physical impression thing, even though it's a little postcard and a stamp, it wasn't a gift. And so these are things I used to do. I think a lot of us used to do, especially if you've been in sales for a while. And if you haven't been in sales for a while, you probably didn't know these are the things people used to do because you're so used to the email systems that are out there and just, being able to hit send on those things. All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Nick Casale over at Sendoso. Listen, we're talking about physical objects. We're talking about physical impressions, stuff that you're getting in the mail. And I think it would be appropriate for me to offer to you, if you want one, a physical copy of my book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. So as a lot of you know, if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that we have a copy of the book available in electronic form. If you go to our website, salesqualia.com, right there on the homepage, there's a place where you can download a full and complete copy of the PDF. Hey, but I got something different for you this time. What if I send you an actual physical copy of the book, a signed copy of the book? In fact, I'd be willing to send you 2 copies if it's for you and your co-founder, you and your head of sales, you and one of your sales contributors. So all you got to do to get a copy of the book is let me know where to send it. So shoot me an email, Scott@salesqualia, SCOTT@salesqualia, QUALIA.com. Just write the word book in the subject line of the email, and then shoot me your address, and I will mail you a physical copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, how to ramp up your B2B startups repeatable revenue with the Q framework. I got lots of copies in boxes here at my office. I'd love sending them out to people. I'd love to get a copy or 2 of that book in your hands as well. So, hey, I'm going to practice what we preach here on the Startup Selling Show and the work we do every single day with Sales Qualia and our clients. So that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Nick Casale. So I guess 2 more questions on this, and then I do want to transition over to some of your sales management and team building experience as well, aside from your expertise here with physical impressions. So what would be one more example? So we talked about top of the funnel, developing, educational, personalized experience. That's low cost, getting a book out there, getting a case study. We talked about relationship, cupcakes, Oreos, company swag. What about later in the funnel? Is there anything down there that you see works particularly well, or some examples of that? How should people be thinking about it just before conversion, or maybe even just after conversion? I mean, maybe that's just as important as the pre-conversion set.
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of a maybe contrarian one, because I think at this point you can really easily justify sending something nice, but I think that's obvious. Bottle of wine, right? You send a Patagonia to your exec sponsor at your target account. But, and I'm kind of piggybacking off your last point here, Scott, the thank you notes, right? Thank you notes. And this is what I love too about selling Sendoso is, if someone's ever skeptical, what we're doing is not some artificial intelligence that you can only use if you buy us. And that's what I love about it. Go write a thank you note. Like any sales rep listening to this, sit down and write a thank you note to your 10 accounts that'll make or break your quarter or your month in 3 weeks. Right. And then see if that has any impact. And I'll bet you that it does for at least one of those deals. Your ROI there is incredible, right?
Yeah.
You're writing, what's that going to cost you total? $10? Maybe,
not even 20, that.
20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, you can get you can just go to get a nice generic thank you card. It doesn't have to be company branded. If your company doesn't have it, go down to TVS and get, a packet of those. Stamps are, whatever they cost nowadays, 40 cents, 35 cents, whatever. And then sitting down, the hardest thing for me is actually my penmanship is so bad.
Oh, mine too.
I have to sit and really, really work on that. But it's a reason to keep it short, keep the note short. You're not trying to, recap the entire sales journey over the last 6 months in the thank you note. But sending those out, I think you're right about that, because it's actually the opposite, right? You're not trying to appear to bribe somebody or buy their business with a bottle of wine type of thing. Like, hey, if we sign this contract, here's a bottle of wine we can crack open to celebrate. That to me feels a little bit weird and cheesy. That's just me. But maybe after you sign, it would make sense to send that. If somebody's like a real wine connoisseur, then it would be worth investing after they've signed.
And I think when in doubt, express gratitude. Right. And that note, it's easy to start to get creative on top of that. That thank you note is expressing gratitude and make it authentic, right? So include, and you can start to layer on what you know about someone. And this is when the power of gifting really, I think, starts to become something that reps use as a unique advantage. So, if you see, especially right now with work from home, I'm on video calls and with our target exec buyer who maybe 6-9 months ago, you would have seen them in the office, and everyone is sort of similar in that way. All of a sudden now you could see someone with 2 guitars in their background. They're a musician. How can I leverage that? Right. Their children are screaming in the background now. Right. How can I leverage that? How can I, use what I know about someone to help build that connection? I think that's something that's always been a piece, like you talked about, selling textbooks, right? Rewind the clock. That relationship used to be such a key piece. That how are the kids was such a key piece of selling. And I really do think that we're going to start to, especially with the increase in empathy and normalcy around bringing your whole self to work now, because there's no alternative, right? We're sort of rewriting the rules on professionalism in a lot of ways. How do you leverage that, right? How do you start to become that A+ seller that's continuing to adapt to what's normal?
Yeah, you really connected a couple dots for me, because like I obviously do a lot of Zoom calls like everyone else right now, and even with clients, like you said, everybody's in their home office, and you can look in their background and you see. And we have a couple clients that are musicians. We have another client who does electronic music. You look in somebody's background, you see a road bike or a mountain bike or a skateboard or something, right? Those are all things you might even ask about in the call. Like, oh, I noticed you got a road bike back there. Are you a cyclist? And then you have that conversation. So for the dots you connect is like, well, just take it one step further and then go down to my local bike shop and find, maybe a really interesting piece of equipment or something that would be useful for someone as a cyclist that they might not have bought on their own, because it's like a $50 object. And they're like, they don't want to spend the money on it, but it would be useful for them. And the kids, like the thing you actually reminded me of is our real estate agent. When we bought this house 2 years ago, we were out shopping for houses endlessly. And we had, at the time, my son was 6. And our agent bought a Where's Waldo workbook. Yeah, you're laughing, right? And it was it was like the most beautiful gift, because she could just say, hey, we're going to be here for a little while. Maybe you'd like to look at this book. And my son would just sit in one of the rooms in the house while we're like walking through it. And we're talking about the house and the price and the schools and all that stuff. And he's just staring at this book. And I'm like, now here's an agent that knows what she's doing. She knew exactly who we were, what we needed, and what gift. And she probably has different types of gifts for the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old and the 12-year-old, all the way up, knowing that this is the way I'm going to get undivided time with the client. So I love that idea of like leveraging and just observing what's going on in people's background with kids screaming. Like, why not send something for the kids, something unique like that? It might be useful. And if it buys them an hour of time, like I think about that a lot. Like if I buy a Lego set for my son, okay, the Lego set's $30, but I bought myself 3 hours. Okay, $10 an hour for babysitting. It's like, that's the equation every parent goes through. So sending like a workbook to your kids, to the kids of people you're working with, it's not expensive, but super effective and really personal.
And we've got companies that are getting really, like Lessonly actually created a coloring book.
Oh, nice.
And it's branded.
A Lessonly coloring book. Yeah.
And they have a really cool like brand, I guess, attitude. Words escaping me.
Yeah.
But it's a llama is their logo. And so it's this llama coloring book. It's llamas in different places. And they just send that to people they know have kids.
I love that. And you reminded me.
You're getting a brand. So it's brand, it's relationship building, and you're buying someone time. That's a home run. And that probably costs them like $5 a unit. Yeah,
for sure. You could find somebody on Upwork or Etsy or somebody like, hey, here's our brand. This is what we want. We want a 20-page coloring book. Come up with 20 sketches, black and white, and map it out. They'll send, you can find somebody in Latin America or, Southeast Asia for, in those economies, like, a $50 project for them buys them groceries for the week. And now you're helping support that local artist. And you're like getting something super inexpensive that you can just reproduce and get sent out. So, man, lots of ideas now. We could probably go on and on. So, yeah, man, this is fun. So I do want to spend some time because you've developed this expertise and these perspectives on like what works and best practices, because you've been at Sendoso since like the beginning, pretty much. You were the first sales hire, right? Employee number 3, if I'm not mistaken. You've been on this journey now with the company for a couple of years, and you've gone from first salesperson to now managing a team. And while we could probably spend 5 hours just unpacking that whole journey, I'd love to just ask you a couple of questions that maybe it's advice that you could give to founders that are looking to hire their first a first person like Nick who can be both a contributor and then eventually a manager. And then I'd love to get some of your perspectives around like, how do you manage and motivate and keep your team focused in, what is a pretty volatile environment from day to day. So maybe I can start that part of the conversation with asking, like, how did you come about to working at Sendoso? Did you know the founders? Was it a recruiter? Like, how did that start?
Yeah. So funny enough, I used to work with our current CEO, Chris Rudigrap. My first job out of college, I moved to San Francisco, went to interview at a company called Talkdesk. It was one of those beautiful 12th floor, right in like 2 buildings over from what's now the Salesforce Tower. And it was this gorgeous full floor that we had maybe 10% of occupied. And I basically talked my way in as the first SDR in San Francisco, told the CEO and the COO that I would do, whatever they wanted. And they said, okay, I guess you can do this SDR thing. And I was working with 6 AEs. One of them was Chris Rudigrap, who 2 years later goes off to start some little thing called Coffee Sender. Everyone thought he was crazy. Okay. And a year after that, he had built out logistics and a warehouse and talked his way into a couple customers and called me up to see if I would come and help him start to sell it.
Got it. So personal relationship, you'd worked with him at Talkdesk and he knew you could perform and knew quickly he was going to need some help getting the word out.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So when did you, as a team with you and Chris, when did you decide it was time to bring on the next sales hire or the next bit of help? What was that progression like? Because that's something I know a lot of founders struggle with, even if they find that first salesperson, whether it's an SDR or an AE of some form or fashion. Like, how do you think about going beyond just like filling a gap that exists to start thinking about growing a real team around you and below you?
Yeah, there's so much good stuff online written about that first sales hire and the first motion into selling. I love the way Jason Lemkin thinks about it. The one thing he sort of poses is hire 2 sales reps first, not 1, because 1 doesn't really tell you if 1 rep is really successful or if 1 rep flops. It doesn't tell you a whole lot, but 2 all of a sudden tells you a ton. I like that thought. We did something really similar. So I was probably selling solo for a month until Chris and I talked to Travis Lockwood, another colleague of ours from Talkdesk, into joining, someone again that we knew could sell and was scrappy, and we had been sort of similar in our career paths there. So that was something we knew we wanted quickly. But in general, kind of back to your earlier question, I love the way that there's, again, so much content on this, but the Sales Acceleration Formula is a great book that sort of breaks this down. That's Roberge, breaks this down into sort of categories of who the first sales hire can be. And I think the biggest mistake, at least when I talk to founders once in a while, is looking for everything, like the perfect hire. I would almost suggest, like, if you were going to take one thing and throw it out the window for the first sales hire, my suggestion would be, I would say compromise on leadership. I think it's okay if your first sales hire is not someone that you think can grow into leadership. Ideally, they are, right? But someone who do not hire enterprise, and this now I think is common wisdom, but do not hire Mr. Enterprise Seller from big competitor company. Like, and Lemkin talks a lot about this. Brennan Cassidy talks a lot about this. There's a ton written on, like, the worst mistake you can make is hire the enterprise seller who expects everything to be very set before them and had a established brand, established marketing support behind them and other sales support. Hire someone really scrappy, right? And I think I also am a contrarian in probably sales hiring in general. I don't think domain experience is as important as the grit and the hunger, right? Like, curiosity for me out trumps domain experience every day.
Yeah. And plus you're getting a different angle, a perspective on the problem, the market, the customers. If it's fresh, then sometimes you come up with better ideas than if you have this insulated world where everybody comes from the industry. Actually, you sort of like don't get outside of that proverbial box enough.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how big is your team now that you're managing?
So I have 8 direct reports now.
You have 8 direct reports. Okay. And so when did you and the team decide to like make the jump from you as contributor, you and Travis were contributing, to now, okay, we need to hire a team? And in your case, it seems like you did have those leadership qualities. So how did you know when it was time to do that? Was it based on a specific funding event or growth or demand, or how did you make that leap? Because it's a big investment of time and money to start hiring out a team.
Yeah. So, I had always sort of told myself a story that I, wanted to continue to move up in terms of my own selling career, and then step into management, probably further down the road than I ended up stepping into management. Where the trade-off really came for me was we hit a point, it was about almost a year ago exactly, where I was just had a conversation with Chris and some of the other management team, and really just felt like I was going to be able to add more value managing, just because
Hmm.
of the level of experience with the space, the conversations we're having, the market. I thought I could add more value by, allocating some percent of my time across 8 reps that are each carrying, you know, 200K a quarter, rather than going off and
Hmm.
carrying 200 a quarter myself. And even if I was going to sort of do well, or let's say, do 150% or 200%, that's still sort of it doesn't, it's not as exponential as if you're able to sort of rise the tide, was the way that we looked
Yeah.
at it as a
So
theory.
did you identify that you just had certain repeatability? You're like, okay, like I got this system locked and loaded for lead gen, right? Like I know once I get a qualified lead, I know if I do these things with a high percentage, we're going to get conversions. So you could continue to manage that, or you felt like there was enough repeatability, like, oh, I could just teach somebody to do the lead gen thing. I could teach somebody to do the account executive thing. Is that what helped you feel like it was time to step up into the organization, or is it something else?
I mean, a lot of it honestly was just, I never felt like I was the best sales rep I knew, but I knew I could sell
Hmm.
Sendoso. And I felt like and I think a lot of that just came from being there for 2 years and having had, especially in the early days, when your calendar is 14 half an hour calls back to back, it's just free throws. You're shooting, 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 shooting. So I just got to the point where, but a lot of my sales process, honestly, and mechanics had kind of gone by the wayside because of that. And so it's very Sendoso
Mm.
specific. So my thought was, look, I can go hire reps that are way better reps than I am, or than I ever was. And then I can teach them what I know about Sendoso. And that will be an order of magnitude better than me selling by myself over here, and then maybe other reps that are reporting to someone who also is a great sales leader, but maybe doesn't have the Sendoso knowledge. I didn't see a ton of value in being on an island with all of this knowledge. I wanted to sort of be able to spread that across the team, but all of it would be completely valueless if not for reps that are, I hire great sales reps that my litmus test is always, do I think they're a better sales rep than me? And,
Mm.
you know, then there's other layers of qualification too, because I hit that one pretty easy.
Hmm.
So it's having great sales reps, and then it's having great sales leadership support, above me as well, right? With
Mm.
our CRO semis, who, has taught me a ton and does a great job of being our, sales leader at the front of the boat.
So when did the team bring in a CRO relative to when you moved from contributor to director?
So we brought in a CRO in Q4 of last year, and basically
Okay.
Q4 was his ride along quarter,
Hmm.
where learning, observing, jumping in sort of where we needed, but really starting to just I talk a ton about sponge mode. Like he was really in sponge mode, right?
Hmm.
Making sure, learning, observing, and then really in January he took over the team, and we've seen a ton of success since that point for sure.
And that's about the same time that if I was trying to track your link from LinkedIn, that seems like about the time you were moving out of like being just a pure AE to moving into director role. So were these kind of parallel tracks where you had a CRO coming in and then you were picking up
Similar.
a small
So
team to manage?
yeah, similar. So what we did is I started managing around a little bit before that. So probably in the middle of right around, I want to say started Q3 last year, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So a little bit over a year ago. And we did well without that executive level of leadership on the sales side. We were sort of
Hmm.
okay, but it was very duct taped. And I think that's okay. Like a little duct tape is always fine. just don't expect
you got nothing else to work with at that stage. I mean, it's spit bubble gum and duct tape. If you're lucky, you've got duct tape.
Right. So it was one of those like, okay, we're holding it together for now, and things are going well, but we were closing deals. We were succeeding very in spite of ourselves with non-scalable methods, and we kind of knew that was what we needed at the time. But we were also very like acutely aware that we needed someone that could take this sort of duct taped model and create a carbon fiber.
Yeah. But you got like version 1.0 of that sales product. Like, your customers are, how to convert them, but it's not necessarily, the full playbook from A to Z. And so I always feel like a sales leader, their job is to take what has already been built and improve upon it, fill in the gaps, and kind of take the assets and put it together in a form and a fashion that makes it more repeatable and scalable.
And that's the advice I always give founders too, is they talk so much about, we want to hire a first sales rep who can come in and create the playbook. And I always sort of just ask why, because that is not inevitably, that's not going to become your playbook, right? You're going to have to a playbook is not a, static document. It's going to be a living, breathing organism. So bring in someone who can sell your product, who's excited about all of the shit that's going to be broken. Because right now you're 3 people in a room. They're not going to have support on anything, but you feel like they can sell your product and they're excited about it, right? And they're curious. They want to learn. They want to work hard. They want to figure this out. The rest will come.
Yeah. Good, man. Well, look, I know we're coming up to the end of the time that we've got blocked out, and I appreciate you taking some time at the end here, especially talking about that. That's a question that we get all the time.
For sure.
Both with clients and non-clients, like when and how and who to hire. And it's $1 million, or in some cases, $1 billion question down the road that people are trying to get. So getting some perspective on that, I think, is really useful. Well, dude, listen, man, I really, really appreciate you making the time to share your wisdom and your expertise. Where can people go to? I mean, obviously they can go to Sendoso. Is it sendoso.com, right? And where can people get in touch with you personally? What's the best place for them?
Yeah, sendoso.com. I'm always happy to chat. Nick at sendoso.com. You can shoot me a note on LinkedIn. You can send me mail.
Yeah. Or you can send them a gift. You're like, hey,
exactly.
I'm going to send Nick a gift so that he'll spend time on me, teaching me how to send gifts.
Yeah. Come on. You'd actually be shocked. I feel like I'm setting myself up here. You'd be shocked how little mail I get. Or in general, our company. I get so many cold emails. And I'm like, dude, I would take a meeting with
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Send me something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like write me a note. I'll take a meeting.
Yeah, that's funny. We'd really love for you to take a look at our platform. Here's my 4th email in the sequence that's obviously copy and pasted from 10 years ago. So
right, exactly.
That's pretty funny. Well, look, man, again, thank you so much for the time and expertise. As soon as we get this recording up, we'll share it with you. You can share it with your tribe of people. Lots of great education here for people that have thought about sending gifts or wondered, like, how do I think about sending gifts, when and how, what kind of gifts to send all across the sales funnel. So it's a great baseline. And I know that just if you go over to Sendoso, tons of resources there as well for people just to do some more self-education and ways to think about what they should be doing or could be doing to help accelerate sales. So, all right, man. Well, I'll let you run for the rest of your day. Thanks for joining the show, Nick. Really good to see you.
Thanks, Scott. A lot of fun.
All right, man. See ya.
Take care. Bye.
All right, folks, that's a wrap. That's my conversation with Nick Casale over at Sendoso. And like I said earlier in this episode, I would absolutely love to make a physical impression for you, with you. So whether you're already a client listening to the show, you're somebody we've been talking with, or you're brand new to the show and we've not met before, I would absolutely love to send you a free copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. And when I mean free means I'll pay for the postage, I'll pay for the shipping. I don't care about that stuff. I will send a copy of this book to you via FedEx for you, and I'll even send you two copies of the book if you let me know who else it's for. So if you want me to send you a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, just send me an email, scott@salesqualia.com, Qualia.com. Just write the word book into the subject heading. I'll get that in my email. I'll get it, or Jobs on my assistant will get it. Send us your shipping address, your best shipping address to send this thing. Send a copy of this book out, and we'll get it in the mail or over to via FedEx to you ASAP. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sembucci.